how to protect yourselves in this strange new world. And look at this, a human female. This is Suelette. Okay, now let me tell you about Suelette. Suelette, give us a proper pronunciation.
Suelette, hi.
Now, guess who she had as her assistant, helping her write a book, which got translated into 7 different languages and had 2 movies made out of it. And I think we're still right. If you can guess who was her assistant who wrote it for her, who helped her write it, rather, you get a BMW, a block of flats in Tasmania. And the initials of that person are JA. We're talking hacking. We're talking busting into things. Anybody know? Julian Assange. Worked for her. My God, she's the forces of evil, the dark side. So, anyway. Oh, hang on, we've got to give you an ice cream cone. Researcher. He's a researcher. So we're going to get you an ice cream cone in a minute. Yeah, it's coming up for you. So you'll be able to... Oh, okay. They're all gradually drifting onto stage because guess what? We're all IT people and we're ever so organised. We're gradually drifting onto stage. You guys get to be comfy. Oh, you don't get a soft couch to sit on. Now, Barry, there's your ice cream cone. Suelette, you get an ice cream cone as well. Okay, right. So, Suelette has been in the game for 20 years. Who is younger than 20 years of age? Okay, so she wrote this book before you were even born and had Julian Assange working for her. Okay, right, and so reading here from the University of Melbourne. Yep, just say hello in your ice cream cone there.
Yeah.
Ice cream cone's coming up.
Working.
Wonderful.
It's working.
Right, so you train journalists. No, yes, you do.
Yeah.
Tell us how wonderful you are.
So I'm well preserved. No, I train journalists. I work at the University of Melbourne. I do research in TechSec, and I'm a lecturer there in Computing and Information Systems School. Julian Assange was my researcher on the original edition and my co-author in the later editions of the book. And that's kind of me. And then there's Barry.
Okay, so then now we've got, now one of them is a good guy and the other one pretends to be a bad guy, and then we'll show the video. So, okay, so Barry, he told me he's a good guy, so he must be. So you're the good guy, and you have been in the game for a quarter of a century on the whole IT thingy, and you work for Cisco, which is really heavy, and the bank. So tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, I have been in for 25 years, as you said. My daughter is probably about the same age as most of you, so I feel pretty old about now. My eldest is 19, she's out there somewhere. Basically work in defense, so Chris attacks networks for the good guys, and my job is to try and keep not only Chris, but more importantly the people who aren't as well-minded as Chris out of the networks. Okay, so we've got full name here, Suelette Dreyfus. And that's the humble Barry Anderson. So he says he's the good guys. And over here is the man who pretends, who mimics, who masquerades as the bad guy. And this is Chris Gatford. So he tries to bust in, been in IT security for 20 years. But ethical hackers, you call yourself? You're hacking for Jesus, are you?
Hacking for Jesus. I use it.
Yeah, so tell us about how wonderful you are.
Thanks. I've been, I guess, what we consider to be an ethical hacker for about 20 years. And that means companies hire myself and my team to try and break into organisations.
So you get hired to try to bust into somewhere?
Correct.
Wow. Good job, eh? Now, we've got a video. Are we ready to roll that first video? Now, we've got a couple of videos to scare the heck out of you. You ready to roll that first video? 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, we'll just do a little bit of backgroundy stuff. We'll go with that in a minute, looking at our links. Okay, so first just a little bit of background about where you stand with IT security. Back in 2007, on the front page of the Herald, it said that every single thing that you did in the internet and every phone call conversation you ever had in your life was being recorded, and that tied in with we're entering conspiracy theory land now. You would know about this Echelon and the Five Eyes. And so the 5 countries in the Five Eyes is where, what was the name, Snowden, who got busted? Yeah, so what happened was that it is strictly illegal for the governments of Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom, United States, it is supposedly illegal for them to spy on their own citizens. So what they do is they do a round robin, each one spies on the other country, and they hand over the data. And so if it turns out that Chris and I had a phone call 3 years ago, and then suddenly they reveal that recording as evidence in a court case against it, it wasn't as though they knew that we were doing something, they just record everything. So everything that you say and do on the internet, on a phone, is being recorded. Then they're pretending, this is a conspiracy theory version, that the metadata is what they're really interested in, they're not really recording you. So with regard to this, for example, the internet thinks that my wife is gay because every time the Mardi Gras comes on, she gets a whole series of emails and texts saying, oh, for the Mardi Gras, you might want to get to there this way by a bus and so forth. And it turns out she's on a sexual assault medical team. And so that's why she's on that list. The second thing we should get across to you while we're still waiting for the videos to get up in a few minutes is the concept, and this is sort of like a good background concept, of encryption. Well, back in the old days, encryption was, for example, that you would just shift the letters. So A would become B, B would become C, and you shift them up and then somebody else could shift them down. And then it got a little bit more complicated where they would have a stick, a tapered stick, and they'd write the message. Or they'd get the stick, they'd wrap paper around the stick, and then they would write the message in straight lines and then unwind the paper, and unless you had a stick of the exact same diameter at the other end, you couldn't read it. And then it went into, and this really blew my mind, the Diffie-Hellman encryption, and this is where you talk about public key, private key. This is fairly heavy, I'll try and get out of the way fairly quickly. So if I want to say, hey Suelette, can we meet for dinner, and I encrypt that, everybody in the world has the software to encrypt it. Everybody in the world has Suelette's private key. I've got it, you've got it. Public key. She's the only one with the private key. We all have the public key, and this is what you use when on the internet you're doing something on your web browser and you see the little padlock. That's happening between your computer and the credit card provider, whatever. What we're going to do is have a theoretical discussion now, designed to make you really scared. Then we'll have a practical session where there are people with green hats. Can green hat people stand up and wave? See these green hat people? These green hat people are going to help you right here and now make your device, if you happen to have it on you, your smartphone, more secure. They will answer questions and help you do it. And if you want to buy some software, not from them but from somewhere else, and you want to tweak it for your machine, they'll help you do that. So we're going to have a theoretical side first, which will be fairly short. Then we'll have a practical side where you'll be able to do that and find out how scary things are. And the two things we want to get across to you are Signal. Signal is a way that you can text to somebody else, and at the moment nobody can bust into it. Right, whereas, so you can tell somebody, I will meet you for a cup of tea, and it's your secret, and you want to know why you want to have a secret. And the second thing is your Facebook privacy.
So if you can go to your app store and look for Signal, make sure if you want to use the app that you download the right signal, because there's some fake signals that...
oh my God.
Yeah, that you don't want to download. It's the one by Open Whisper Systems, so you should all go at this very same moment now and crash the network and try and download it, a few hundred people at the same time. But one thing you shouldn't do is, if it's not downloading, don't keep pressing the button, because that's really bad when everyone does that.
And the other thing is, if you want to call for help, put your hand up and wiggle your fingers. And that means you want some help from one of the green hat people. If you just want to ask a question, just stick your hand up and don't wiggle your fingers. So wiggly means you're really, really panicky. So we'll go sort of into the we've got the videos coming up in a minute or two. Disturbing cyber attacks that happened recently. Who wants to talk about that, guys? Over to you.
I'll take that. Probably a really good example that most of you would have heard of is a thing called WannaCry. Recently, what that did was it actually took down networks, because once it was inside the network, it spread with legitimate credentials. So for example, the NHS in Britain was probably one of the best examples, where you've got hospitals that were actually offline for extended periods of time. You know, so...
NHS is National Health System in the United Kingdom?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, yeah. Which is different from the NSA, which is the National Security Agency.
Although ironically they were both involved. The vulnerability that was at the base of the WannaCry malware was actually one that was developed by TAO, I believe, for the NSA. So TAO is Tailored Access Operations, which is basically the hacking arm of the NSA.
They're described as the like the plumbing plungers when they can't get through.
Right, so
System.
the background there is that the NSA is the highest level American organisation that supposedly is
National
snooping.
Security Agency.
And what are they doing?
So basically they're your Department of Defense cyber arm. And at the moment it's actually merged with the Cyber Command, though that may be changing in the next couple of months.
Right, so you were talking?
So they are tasked with doing the technical side of eavesdropping on other countries' communications, and also providing some defensive help as well.
So the bad news is that every email and every phone conversation you've had since 2007 is in the NSA's data storage in Utah. The good news is that if you happen to accidentally delete an email, you can ring them up and ask them what it was. The bad news is they don't have a phone number. Okay. More
So
about
Karl,
the cyber.
I was just going to say one other thing. There are a bunch of different types of security issues that have been in the last couple of years. So one of them has been around malware, the way that Barry mentioned, and that's a bit of software that goes around and does something bad to your machine. And in this case, it was ransomware. That's where the software will say to you, we're going to lock up your machine with encryption, and you can't access your data unless you pay a fee to us, these hidden, shadowy people. But there are other types of security breaches that have happened that have been very, very widespread to sort of average users. And that's, for example, hacked of LinkedIn passwords. So there's been major breaches in Yahoo, in Verizon, a whole variety. And these are tens of millions of customers who've been affected. People who use Edmodo, I don't know if any of you guys use those in school, but all of those have had big implications.
Just a question here. So as soon as Yahoo, for example, finds out that all of the passwords of its users have been hacked, they of course tell everybody immediately within 10 seconds?
That's a very interesting question, because in theory the answer should be yes, but in Yahoo's case it was about 2 years.
So during that 2-year period, you had your password, you were accessing it, and the bad guys could do it, and Yahoo did not tell you that your security had been breached. But is it just your password that you lose as well?
No, depending on the system. Do you want to speak to this, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends on the breach. It's amazing what users could find useful, or attackers find useful from their users. Oh, here we go.
Yep.
So, I think one of the, we talk about breaches and we talk about data loss and using your passwords, but, there's a whole industry, a whole criminal industry behind this that makes use of that data. And often the reason why it takes a little while for it to get out, obviously most organizations don't do very, very good security monitoring of their environment, but also the bad guys don't use the data straight away because they don't want to reveal where they got the data from. So they take their time. They can wait up to, it's quite well known, they'll wait up to 6 months from when they took the data before they actually start using it. So there's various reasons why.
Can I ask a question? How many of you guys use a password that you've got in more than one account? Hands up. Excellent. You've just breached the most fundamental rule of data security. So that means if you use that password, for example, for a LinkedIn account or your Yahoo account, and it was in the breach, potentially all your other accounts that use that password are also at risk. Do you feel happy now?
I'm curious. You touched on ransomware before, and it is something that is affecting certainly the entire world, but specifically here in Australia, right? Like here in Australia, we tend to have a lot of IT use. We're relatively trusting, so we've seen multiple, thousands and thousands of organisations being affected by this in Australia. I'm just curious, who here has sort of witnessed ransomware or been a victim of ransomware?
A few people. So just to summarise what Suelette so eloquently said, you click on an email that says your postage has come from, your package has come through the post office, you click on it, suddenly everything is encrypted and you have to pay them a couple of $100 and either you pay it or you never get it. That's how brutal they are.
Or you pay it and you never get it. Because a lot of people are using Bitcoin so that it's untraceable. But the problem is that those wallets are actually getting shut down and or monitored, so somebody who's really in it for the money isn't going to tend to do that as much. because one of the things about the blockchain is you can actually follow the transactions and you can see money moving. So, for example, with NotPetya, what was called Petya, which looked like another version of just ransomware, and it was actually the Russians attacking the Ukraine, people were going and paying the ransoms, only they were never getting their files back.
Right. Now, we're going to scare you a little bit. So we've got this video here. Now, is this yours, Chris?
It's not mine, but it's somebody demonstrating a tool that is of certain...
Just watch this, and you'll think differently about when somebody says, "Hey, here, look, here's my file on the USB stick. Have a look. See, have a look at the file."
Just put this friendly USB stick in your laptop.
Yeah. We're talking about malevolence. Okay, go for it, Chris. Speak over it.
I think there's audio.
You can talk over it. So you put the memory stick in. Keep going.
So here we are. There's the memory stick. It's
See
sparking.
sparking.
This is called USB Killer. And what they're doing now is they're taking off the safety section. And what this is going to do, keep an eye on the laptop. It takes the voltage from the laptop and puts it back in, but at 10 times, 20 times the amount.
It's filling up capacitors over and over.
See how the laptop screen might be hard to see, but the laptop screen just went dead. So this killed, with one USB key, the entire machine. Now I want you to pause for a second. Where is the worst place you can think you've ever seen a USB port?
Okay, besides your computer, where else do you see USB ports? Car, what was that? An aeroplane. Yes. So let's get this straight. So it sucks out the 5 volts that's already been given to it, but then it puts it into a capacitor and another capacitor, and it builds it up until it's got 240 volts, and then the stuff that's built up for a couple of minutes, it suddenly puts it back into the system, and your computer can catch on fire. Bad enough if your computer is on your desk, a little bit worse if it happens to be on an aeroplane. So how much does it cost to buy one of these things? $10,000?
These are $75.
$75.
Now, somebody said car. So, in this one here, we actually see, this is some really annoying commentary over this one, so I'll see if it comes through, but...
Malevolent music.
All right, you're going to get the full montage, I think, here, because I can't cut it down.
At least 3 cartons. There you go.
All right, so in this particular one, if you think, we mentioned before, planes, cars, we see them everywhere. If you plug them into certain types of machines with some really nasty power supplies, they do burst into flames. Dell computers are quite well known to burst into flames. So, if you're looking at work to get a new upgrade to your machine, this is not a recommended solution, but it is a possible viable one. Now, we've finally got to it. So here's a guy. He's got some annoying Latin music playing in the background. Listen to the music stop. Dash, entertainment, everything dead. Back to the dealer it goes.
Okay, so even just a plain memory stick can kill your computer, the electronics in your car, and in some degrees the aeroplane. Let's get back on it. So we just want to scare you. Well, now we've got a little bit of a theoretical pathway we're going to go through, then we'll do the practical thing with the green hats. So moving right along here, disturbing metadata. What is metadata?
So metadata, if you think about a telephone conversation, let's say I call you, Carl, and we're having a conversation. You might need, depending on what country you're in, a warrant from a police. The police might need a warrant from a judge to actually access the conversation itself. But you can learn a lot about what people are doing, not from the conversation, but from the connection between the two of them. So for example, if you and I are in different places and we're both on our mobile phones, you can collect as the metadata the rough location of where you are. How often we call each other, how long do we talk for? Do I call another place afterwards? And the kind of revelations that you can think about is actually from a US Supreme Court ruling on whether or not the FBI was allowed to, without a warrant, do GPS tracking of cars. And what one of the judges described is the incredible amount of privacy that's breached by metadata. So if you think about trips to the psychiatrist, to the STD clinic, the abortion clinic, your church, synagogue, or mosque, the union meeting, a political party meeting, all of these things can effectively be traced by the metadata without actually listening to the conversation or the content of a conversation itself.
Wow. And roll video?
We've got a good quote, actually. Oh, we're going to do the mind reader. Oh, okay, this is great. This is a really good video out of Belgium, actually, that tells you a lot about how much you can find about someone from their social media, but all sorts of data that's available on the web.
Roll video.
Dag Fien. Dus ik zie een school tegen Antwerpen.
Ja.
Insecten.
Alsjeblieft.
Ik voel 2 insecten op je rug. Kan dat?
Ja, vlinders.
Slovenie?
Zo, hè.
Een moto. Oranje.
Pas erop.
Zenit.
Oui, oui, bien.
Je hebt een vriendin. Julie de...
Ja.
Een boeiend liefdesleven. 3, 4 zelfs.
Die vierde, daar zwijg ik meestal over, dus dat weten niet veel mensen.
Dat is mijn spierscheur. Maison rouge, balcon blanc. Ja. Ik zie geld, ik zie transacties, maar kent je rekeningnummer van buiten? Ik denk dat ik het wel weet. Het staat wel negatief op je bankrekening.
Ja?
97. Last month you spent €200 on alcohol. Vorige maand €300 aan kleding gespendeerd. 8.
Ja.
5. Voor een huis dat van eigenaar gaat veranderen. €295.000.
Ja, eigenlijk.
41.
Ja.
Is dat juist?
Ja, dat is juist. Oh my god. Oh nee. Ah, dat is, ik weet niet hoe eng.
I love that video.
So what it's showing is that you've got this huge profile. As you walk around, you are leaving behind you electronic breadcrumbs, which then reveal so much about you, which can, if somebody's vaguely malevolent, can be used against you. And then on one hand, Suelette is just trying to inform you. Barry says he's trying to protect you, and Chris is saying that he's trying to pretend to be the bad guy who steals it from you. So what have we got here about metadata? What's the difference for the average person? Does it make any difference whether you give away your metadata or not?
Well, part of the issue we know, for example, is that metadata can be dangerous for journalists or their sources. So in Australia this year, we saw that reporter Paul Farrell from The Guardian had his metadata trawled by the Australian Federal Police, some 200 pages of his phone records, and very clearly they were looking for his sources on a set of stories. So that means that, you know, it damages potentially his reputation if his sources get exposed, not to mention the sources who might be whistleblowers.
But the Australian government has a very clear idea of what metadata is.
Yeah, and in fact the Australian government has legislated that the ISPs and the telcos have to collect and store your metadata for 2 years.
What's an ISP?
Your internet service providers. And your telcos have to store this metadata for everyone for 2 years, and that's a bit out of sync with other countries. So in Europe, they've actually moved away from storing the metadata, or they might only store it for 6 months because of the privacy concerns.
But surely our elected Australian officials would know very clearly what metadata is.
Well, no, not so much. So the Attorney General has an interesting definition of what metadata is, and he's able to share his insights into exactly what metadata is just now.
Roll.
consequence of the new anti-terror laws the government has proposed just yesterday. Joining me now is the Attorney-General, George Brandis. Welcome to the program. Hi, David. Let's start with this plan for mandatory retention of metadata. What is metadata in your view?
Well, the metadata is but the metadata is the call is initiated, the phone number to which it's the difficulty here. I don't want this data for billing purposes. What people are viewing on the internet. Well, I think we are, as it were, the wrong path. The agencies are the web address is part of the metadata. Please understand, David, that what has been, well, we want it to be caught, but what the security agencies want to know to be retained. What you're viewing on the internet, browsed and that browsing history won't be retained or.
Okay, right. He's got no idea. Okay, so
he can legislate for it, but he's not really sure what it is.
Okay, so one at a time. Can we get 3 different views, bang, 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 of what you think metadata is?
So metadata is data about the transaction, be it a communication, not the communication itself. Unfortunately, and here's the rub, a lot of definitions of metadata include any data that you can generate from the data itself. So for example, if I have a recording of your phone call and I translate that into text and I then parse that text and keep the markup from the parsed text, that's metadata, not data, so that's okay to keep and it's okay to use against you.
Okay, Suelette, metadata.
I'm with Barry. He's got the perfect definition of it. But I guess the bigger question might be whether people in the audience have a view on what metadata is, if any of you guys have a thought.
Yeah, anybody want to ask? We've got a wonderful fluffy microphone here we can throw at you. Okay, who wants to throw it? Can chuck it over in that, which direction? Okay, catch this microphone. It's a microphone. Yo, okay. We don't know if it works. Give it a go.
Check.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, wonderful IT people and AV people.
Would it be easier to say that metadata is everything bar the actual content?
Yeah, Chris, what do you reckon?
Yeah, that's not bad. I have to describe it to a lot of executives quite often, and I have to dumb it down as simply as possible. So I've got it a little bit succinct, and that's how I would certainly describe it to the average person, but I call it the digital breadcrumbs that tell me what loaf of bread it came from.
Now over here, suddenly I'm thinking, does metadata actually matter to you and me on a daily level as an individual citizen? And it says here from the former director of the NSA and the CIA, we kill people based on metadata. If you rang the wrong person, we'll kill you. No hard feelings for the wrong number. Sorry, you get the fat finger syndrome.
So it's interesting. We know that a number of the killer drone strikes that have occurred in this continuing war on terror have been based in part on, hey, we think this is a terrorist phone number, we think this is the number they're calling, we've tracked to where it is at a particular point in time, send a drone. But even more alarming is the idea that whether or not they know someone is in fact the terrorist, patterns of phone metadata are analyzed in an automated fashion to say, well, this looks like it could be an actual terrorist. And there have been cases, in fact, of people who weren't terrorists, but were just going from, for example, village to village because they were elders or whatever, but their patterns match the same patterns. This metadata matched the same patterns. And they suffered potential, they were basically, someone tried to assassinate them using a drone.
Okay, we've talked about the government security, terrorism is a new communism thing. What about the dollar value? What about the cash value? If you're getting an application for free, then you are the application. Your data has been vacuumed up and you are paying for it by losing your privacy. Over to you, Dr. Suelette.
So a lot of people don't realize the value of their data. So if I ask you guys, would you give me some of your data if I gave you, would you give me a bunch of your data if I gave you $1? Your name, your address, maybe the names of your email accounts. How many of you would hand that over for $1? Ah, we have a savvy audience. So there's actually a site run by Financial Times in the UK where you can go and you can tick a set of boxes about what profile you've got. So are you a woman? Have you just had a baby? Have you just gotten engaged? These sorts of questions. And it'll add up a dollar amount for you of what that information is worth. And that's in the open market. That's with people who are running marketing companies who want to collect this. The sort of most valuable information is literally if you're about to have a baby or if you've just gotten engaged, because you're obviously about to spend a lot of money on a wedding or buying baby stuff. But that doesn't count what your value might be sort of elsewhere in the darker underworld, so with your Medicare number or other sorts of things. Chris, you might have some comments on the value on that.
Yeah, I mean, Australian identities are actually really prized. We're a premium in the underground markets because, you know, we are a relatively rich nation, we're quite IT savvy, and often that data comes, you know, with your personally identifiable information. If someone's compromised you and got a good source, they've got other access to other information about you as well. So there's a thriving market for ID data on the dark net.
So what sort of dollar value and what sort of profiles, like, is it worth more if you got your birthday in there?
Yep, a complete set of PII for somebody.
PII?
Personally identifiable information.
These guys use a lot of TLAs or three-letter acronyms. Yeah, okay, so your value of your PII?
Yeah, so your personally identifiable information, you know, your standard set, which is, you know, your name, your date of birth, your address, your phone numbers, your maiden name, if that's applicable, your mother's details, your parents' details, if that data is captured as well. That's extremely valuable.
How much, like $1, $10?
Yeah, I think you probably get around, if you're buying a set, they probably average out to around $1. $1.50 at the moment, yeah.
So there have been reports, and obviously they're not always reliable because you might be taking it from whatever, dodgy, dark sites. But the most expensive is a full medical report on someone, and that could be as much as $1,350.
$1,300?
Yeah, full, all details, all your medical details, all everything. But cheaper things might be a driver's license and a set of other details about you might be about $27. I've seen email addresses could be just 70 cents. I've seen some quotes on credit cards that have run from $2 to $10 with additional personal information provided to that. I don't know if those are numbers you've seen around about that.
Barry?
No, Chris would be more familiar with this than me because he tends to monitor the market for customers. The one thing I'd put in at that point, though, is it's not just the relatively low cost, it's the fact that that information can be used to steal your identity. Probably the best story about this, which happened in the last, I don't think we've got that in, okay. So in the last week or so, the head of an IT security company, ironically, over in, I think it's Sweden, was actually declared bankrupt due to a loan that had been taken out with stolen identity information in a case he didn't know about because he'd filed for bankruptcy. And so as a result of that, he was actually booted from his job as the CEO of his company and taken off the boards of 2 other companies because you can't be any of those things when you're a bankrupt over there. So that's kind of an understanding of the impact.
But he wasn't really bankrupt.
Yeah, but you said 20...
Well, he was because the court declared him bankrupt.
Wow. But you said it's $20 for a driver's license, but if you go into an RSL, they say, oh, just swipe your driver's license there and do a scan of it. Do they then take that and then sell it for $20?
No, that scares the hell out of me, those things.
Yeah.
It's like... I mean, I'm not into pubbing and clubbing as much anymore, but I understand that they scan pretty much everybody's IDs these days as you're going into clubs, especially in Sydney.
Okay, so you're the ethical hacker. How paranoid do you get, say, with your credit card details?
Credit card details, I honestly do not care about.
You're safe with them?
Because we have the banking guarantee in Australia. So if there is an illegal transaction or a fraudulent transaction on your account, you can ask the bank to reverse it. Yeah, you have to jump through some hoops, but I don't worry about that. That's recoverable.
What do you worry about?
Well, you can't get your birth date back. You can't get your home address back once that gets lost, right? So, unless you move or you change your identity, move country. It's very hard. So once you lose those core identity credentials about yourself, that's when it really worries.
But aren't they given away for free on Facebook?
Well, Yeah, some things, but they're not giving away passports or driver's license photos, right? And those organisations, no offence to your local RSL, I don't really trust their security group, even if they had one. It's going to be some back-end system stuck on the receptionist's desk that, might get patched once in a year because some printer stopped working.
So who do you see as doing the bad hacking? Who are the bad guys at the moment? Speaking as a guy who pretends to be a bad guy.
So there are certainly, really good, organised groups doing it. So I wouldn't call it so much organised crime. I guess it kind of falls into that path. But there are organised groups online that go after the organisations that collect this data. They scrape it up. They take it out either really overtly or covertly. And then they sell it online, and they're making good money out of it. The adoption of Bitcoin is huge, and it's really helped, and other cryptocurrencies really helped develop the underground currencies and the underground markets.
So, just for everybody, is there a lot of traffic going around on unencrypted networks that people can then vacuum up and then do bad stuff with? Chris, you?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons. When you're trying to advise people on data security, we've become so used to technology. We use open Wi-Fi networks wherever they are. We don't really think about the consequences of some of these things that we use. But if you stopped and thought about the data that's flowing, especially over Wi-Fi, when you pop into your local hotels, for example, it's extensive. You can put a really good picture together about somebody with only 10 minutes of their web traffic.
Wow. So how important, for example, is this two-factor authentication I keep on hearing about?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Two-factor authentication is really important. The thing to understand is that the factors refer to the ways in which you can identify yourself, right? And there's three ways. There's something you have, there's something you know, like a password, for example. Here's a good example of something you have. So a good example of something you have is this here. It's called a YubiKey, right? It looks like a little USB stick, like the USB killer that
oh dear,
Chris was showing us before. But for example, I can plug that into my computer and the computer will recognize that this is me because this has some information that was generated previously to actually identify that this is my YubiKey.
Can I ask you, is that encrypted as it flows from the USB stick into the motherboard on your computer? Is there an encryption thing happening there?
It's actually more a challenge response, and the way in which the key responds correctly is based... Remember the Diffie-Hellman thing that we were talking about before? It's like that. It's where how the key responds is based on that it possesses that piece of information.
Right. Okay,
right?
so there's something that you have, so you have that.
Something you
that
have.
You are.
Something that you are. A good example of something you are is typically what they refer to as biometrics. So, for example, your fingerprint, your retina pattern. There's an interesting story about retina patterns. One of the first things that change when you get pregnant due to hormonal changes, guys, you can probably stop listening now, is the pattern of the blood vessels in your eye, right? So they had to retrain a whole lot of security guards in high security installations in the States because people were finding out they were pregnant by saying, the eye scanner won't let me in, and the first thing the guard would say is, oh, you must be pregnant.
Okay, so something that you are, something you have...
And something you know, like a password.
So these are the three things, and we'll talk about passwords and password managers later. We've got to keep moving through the theoretical side here. Do the average person have to worry about this, or is it just big companies that have to worry?
No. Almost everyone should have some level of concern. The idea is to really assess, well, what's the threat to me, right? And so, for example, if you're doing financial transactions, you want to have a higher level of protection than if you're posting a photo of a barbecue.
Fair enough.
So if you guys have ever gotten from your bank one of those little dongles that generates a number, and you have to enter that in along with the password that you know, that's something you have.
Right, and that's still pretty high security?
Yeah.
Right.
So the thing with the second factor is, one example of second factor that probably a lot of people who use any of the banking apps are familiar with is you might get an SMS about a transaction that you've just initiated, especially if it's a first-time transaction, right? show of hands for anybody who's familiar with using an SMS as a second. Yeah, so most people, right? Now, it's now gotten to the stage, however, where it's worth people's time and effort actually attacking the signalling protocols to actually play games with that. So basically, anybody who's using multi-factor authentication for serious things where, you know, large amounts of money are at stake or somebody's life depends on it, won't actually use an SMS as second factor anymore. Because if criminals are using it to go after retail-sized transactions, you're not going to trust a huge wholesale-style transaction or somebody's life to that.
And well, we know of cases that have been reported of overseas where, you know, journalists, human rights groups, all sorts of these sort of organizations have had their SMSs intercepted and basically had accounts hacked. So it's a useful first point, but you got to move on to something better.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. You've got to have some kind of second factor, but don't rely on it completely. Because, you know, for example, when we're attacking organizations, we just fish not just for the username and password, but we fish for the second factor as well. So, you know, you do have to be cognizant of still where you're going. You can't rely on second factor to be a be-all and end-all, but it's certainly better than just username and password.
If you get paid to go and bust into some network, how often, what's your success rate? 1%, 10%, 80%, 50%?
Depends on the scenario. Typical external kind of attacks will probably average around 70 to 80% success rate.
70 to 80% of the time you can bust in?
Yeah. Yeah, it's only a matter of time. It's only ever a matter of time, not so much about the defenses. But internally, once we're inside an organisation, you're sitting down, it's game over.
Let's sort of navigate our way to encryption and man-in-the-middle attack. Can you sort of explain that? So this is sort of part of the background that you need to know. In the old days, if somebody came out with you with a knife, you knew to be aware of it. But if somebody just says, "Hi, I'm Karl, what's your name?" and then suddenly they're getting a whole lot of data. So tell us about this.
All right, I'll give it a first stab. So obviously, you know, when you have got encryption going and you know, let's say you're browsing a secure site and everything's cool. You've got the right coloured address bar. You know, it looks like people have told you in the past to look for the padlock. That wasn't actually a great idea because attackers just started putting padlocks on the actual pages. So,
wow, who would have thought that?
As an image,
yeah.
Well, it's just about training people correctly. Anyway. Your browser, and these days, most stuff on the internet's pretty good at securing itself, but attackers have got some tools about them. Now, one of the greatest things we can do as an attacker, you know, is intercept traffic before the other site responds and start becoming what we call a man in the middle. So we're kind of like relaying the traffic for you. Who has ever, when they've been browsing the internet, who's seen those annoying pop-ups that say the certificate doesn't match the site you're going to? Who's seen those?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now that's generally speaking because the admin has been lazy. They haven't matched the certificate to the actual name that you're going to.
This is the digital security certificate?
Correct, yeah. So the SSL certificate.
SSL stands for?
Secure Socket Layer.
Secure Socket Layer, yeah.
Secure Socket Layer.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Okay,
TLA,
right.
Sorry,
he doesn't even know his own acronyms. There's so many of them in his head. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So anyway, those annoying pop-ups has all trained us because of often IT's been crap. We've trained to sort of accept those pop-ups, right? But the internet's changed. People are doing that well now. So when you get those pop-ups, it could be an indicator that someone's trying to do a man-in-the-middle attack on your traffic.
Really?
Yeah.
So there's a slide here of a demo of a network graph of your social network provided by Barry. Just click forward. Is that here on the machine? Okay. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So
that's it there.
This was more going back to the amount of information in breaches. So, for example, you know, I've been that email address has been out on the internet for 20 years. So that's in 4 major breaches. So you know, there's certain amounts of information. LinkedIn, for example, was storing passwords.
Oh, this email address here, Shory
at bigpond.net.au.
Okay, right, okay,
yep,
Read that out to everyone, Karl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been there for 20
Shory
years. It was in LinkedIn and a MySpace breach, so come on. Don't judge me.
Right.
So the interesting one about LinkedIn is the passwords were stored as SHA-1 hashes, right? So it's not as bad as they were storing the passwords in clear text, and so straight away with no effort, you know, people have all your passwords. But the problem is SHA-1 hashes are really...
SHA stands for SHA, which is...
Shahir...
There were three Israeli guys?
Yeah. There's 3 Israeli guys that basically came up with... A hash is a one-way encryption algorithm, and they came up with this, and it's named after them.
So
and I can never remember their names. But
this is weird, the one-way thing. So I can go 1 and 2 is 3, and I can go backwards. 3 minus 2 is 1. But when you try multiplying a 50-digit number by a 400-digit number, you get this huge thing. You can easily multiply them to get a big number. Coming back is really hard. So that's what you mean by it's one way.
yeah, so in essence, a lot of internet security depends on factoring large numbers into their primes is actually a really difficult thing to do. Now, if anybody ever proves that otherwise, like all the security apparatus we built up, we're all screwed, right? Because basically what it's saying is there's this class of math problems that are really hard and nobody knows how to solve them.
And it's as simple as that. You just get a really big number with maybe 128 digits is how long we've got for credit card now? Is it 256 digits?
128 or 256.
Okay, so you've got this really long number with 128 digits or 256, and this number has got only 2 factors, and they're both primes, and trying to find that out is really hard. And if you go to any university like my university, and you go into the quantum physics laboratory, and you walk down the corridor, you'll see posters of their work, and at the bottom of the poster is this big American eagle and the NSA logo, who is paying them to try and develop quantum computers, so that level of security will be gone. And so they're paying them all around. You see the NSA eagle everywhere.
Yeah, and the important thing to realise about the NSA, Suelette was describing what they do, right? But the important thing to realise about them is they hire the best and brightest mathematicians in the States straight out of uni, they lock them up forever, and they patent their math. So if anybody knows how to solve these problems, it's them. You know, and the funny thing is there was a story way back when about the DES algorithm, which probably most
DES stands for
Data Encryption Standard. So this was the first crypto standard that was used for things like banking, encryption, and that sort of thing, right? And everybody said, oh, there's a problem here because NSA gave IBM advice when they were coming up with the algorithm, right? What it really was NSA knew of an attack on the implementation, and this is the problem with crypto, a lot of the problems are in the implementation. They knew of an attack on the implementation that a slight design change would thwart approximately 40 years before the attack was known in the general academic community.
40 years?
40 years.
And they knew of that secret backdoor. Can you just, by the way, tell people what a backdoor is?
So basically a backdoor is when the organisation knows something about the, say, algorithm that they shouldn't, and that knowledge is enough to allow them to thwart that.
Suelette, you got a definition of backdoor?
Exactly that. It basically, it's a security flow.
Yeah,
Chris would be more an interesting working definition.
Yeah.
What is a backdoor?
I guess I'm trying to think of the easiest way to summarise it without using a 3-letter acronym.
I'm picking on you too much.
So obviously a backdoor often left in either accidentally by manufacturers or on purpose allows people to go in through a secret door to gain full access to whatever we were talking about. And it comes in everything, you know, there's been backdoors and even internet-connected TVs recently. So.
And by the way, with these guys, they each have a bit of sticky paper across the camera on their laptop screen. Mate, they don't trust
you can buy a camera cover that slides. They're a couple, $5-10 or something. It slides across. You just stick it on the top of your laptop or your phone's camera, and you can just slide it across when you want pictures and slide it across when you don't want people to take pictures. And this is important because there's actually been malware that's out there that hasn't just been about ransoming, demanding money to actually get your data back. There's actually software that's taken pictures of people, and then potentially you have the risk of someone threatening to release those pictures. So if you imagine you've left your phone on the bathroom counter when you come out of the shower, bad things could happen.
And the green light doesn't have to be on. They've worked their way around that. We've got to move to the practical part soon. But Barry, you have one more slide about your social network? Or is that it? Are we there?
We can skip it,
bypass that. Okay, we'll bypass that. Okay, now we're heading to the practical side. So the green hat people will be your friends. Where are the green hat people? So yeah, there they are. So we're going to call them if you need any help. So we're going to go into this in patching. So what's the question here, Suelette?
So this is a bit of software that's free. It's free to download, it's free to use. It's called Signal. It's by Whisper Systems. And the same software that provides the encryption in it is also used in WhatsApp. Which is a reasonable second option, although most tech people would probably recommend Signal over it. So if you want to go to the App Store and download it, we would encourage you, and some of the helpers just put your hand up or wave or motion to them, they'll come show you. Also tomorrow at 12:30 in the science tent, there'll be some more hands-on help for any tech stuff you might want done. But Signal is great because it allows you to send a message to your friends who also obviously need to be on Signal, and it uses end-to-end encryption. So some messaging services, like Skype, will use encryption to Microsoft, and then Microsoft encrypts it from them to the person you're speaking to. Well, that's fine if you trust Microsoft, but you might actually feel more comfortable actually sending it to your person at the other end as a full point-to-end encryption.
So you can have two texting ones, the standard one plus a secret Signal one with your friends.
So, well, the Signal one isn't secret in the sense that if someone looked at your phone, they'd see that you had Signal on it. You do have to enter your phone number in. It does access your contact book, kind of needs that information, but it's encrypted, and you can send, for example, photos over it as well as text messages.
So this is a really secure messaging app.
Yeah, it's really secure, and because it's open source, the code that's behind it has been published. It means that the general community of techies can actually go through it and see if they see any flaws or hidden backdoors in it.
Okay, it's got here disk encryption, phone encryption.
Yeah, so basically that's just talking about encrypting your data at rest. So if, for example, you've got a laptop that doesn't have disk encryption and somebody steals your laptop, they have your data. Now, most people would go, oh, they're not going to know my password. Chris would probably be quite happy to show you in the science tent how it doesn't take knowing your password to actually own your computer in no time flat.
And when is this in the science tent? Tomorrow?
Tomorrow at 12:30.
Yeah, so you get more practical stuff. So is anybody downloading Signal yet? No?
Yeah, anyone downloading Signal? You guys, has anyone put their hand up if you've got it?
Some people have already got it.
Good, excellent.
Now, do you need help with the green hat people yet, or are you cool? They're cool. Okay, so
you may, on an Apple, on an iPhone, you may need to flick the iPhone off and on once just to get it to recognize your list of contacts so they come up. And that's especially true if it's an older model iPhone.
Okay, well, we move on to passwordy things. Updates, auto updates. Okay, here we go. Now how do you pronounce that PWNED word?
Poned.
At least they agree on it. I didn't know how to pronounce it. I've seen it. What does it mean? Have I been, what do I say, pwned?
Essentially, when you hear pwned, think compromised.
Compromised.
Or said another way, owned.
I think the word you're looking for is hacked.
Oh, because O and P are next to each other on the keyboard. So what happens if suppose I've been pwned? What does that mean?
Yeah, so there's a site called Have I Been Pwned, which is run by a guy called Troy Hunt, who's one of the good guys. He basically collects the breach information. So what you can do is you can enter in your email address and see if that email address was in any of the breaches. Now, what that allows for is a whole lot of you before put up your hand, and that's just being honest, right? So from that point of view, it's great. What you put it up about was I reuse my passwords. This is a good way to find out if those passwords are out there. Now, here's the other reason that you can't rely on that, and that's because there's a difference between when a breach occurs and when information about the breach becomes public. With LinkedIn, it was like 4 years. With MySpace, it was like 8 years. That means that password that you reuse on other accounts, somebody had that for between 4 and 8 years before anybody else knew about it, let alone before the good guys knew about it and put it up on a website.
Why didn't they release immediately that they'd been hacked and that your password was out there in the clear?
Well, there's two things, right? One is they didn't know immediately. I mean, usually bad guys are in a network for somewhere on the order of 400 days, and usually the good guys don't find the bad guys. They get told by law enforcement or by somebody who's using that network to attack other people.
Right.
Hey, you've got a problem with your network, right? So there's two things. There's dwell time for the bad guys, which is how long they're in the network before they're actually detected. And then the other thing is, like with Yahoo, they found out, they knew, they didn't tell people. Like, they had a legal obligation as well as the ethical one. They had a legal obligation to tell people. They didn't tell people.
Does turning on auto update help? Like, I did it at one stage on my Apple computer, and suddenly I found that the internet didn't work, and it just came and went in one weekend. And there was another occasion when I downloaded some Microsoft update and Word crashed, and I had to start from the beginning. So what's your advice there on auto update?
Yeah, look, you know, one of the best things you can do is keep your systems up to date. So that means, yep, turning on those patches, making sure that you get that software updated, and buying the software. Because often people get stuck, they can't update the software because, you know, they're running a 4-year-old version that they got off their friend, and it doesn't update because it's an illegal version. So just, you know, spend the money, buy the software, keep it updated. Best position you can ever be in. And whilst there are some risks with auto update, Dr. Karl, you're not wrong. On the whole, these days, they're actually pretty good. They have to be, right? Because, you know, they're supporting millions and millions of people around the world. So, yeah, absolutely. More importantly, on the auto update thing, this is a good one, Android devices specifically. Android devices tend to be, on average, at least 2 years out of date. It's because when
Why?
when the patches come out, like for the Android project, it goes from Google to the vendors, the Samsungs, the Nokias, the other million other providers of Android phones, and then they have to test it on their devices. Then they pass it to the telcos in each country, and the telcos have to test it to make sure it isn't going to affect the network, although it couldn't get much worse. And then it gets to you guys. Now, if you don't have an Android device directly from Google, it's one of currently the Google Pixel devices, right? Like, you have to go through that entire cycle. That can take, on average, up to 1.5 years.
Wow. Okay, passwords. Who's got more than 5 passwords? 10? More than 20? More than 30? More than 50? I've got 100 for the different magazines. Green Hat over there's got 100. I'm sort of running out around 100. Anybody here on stage got more than 100? How many have you got?
Do they have to be mine?
Okay. Like I subscribe to $10,000 worth of scientific journals a year, and so that's about 50 of them, and so each one's got a hopefully slightly different password. So would you have 100 passwords, a couple of hundred? What's the best thing to do with passwords? Because what I've got them written down is in a not encrypted file somewhere on my computer.
The best thing to do without question is use a password manager. And, you know, the exact details of what's better is LastPass better, is 1Password better. We could probably have, you know, Chris and one of the Green Hat guys debate, you know, furiously in front of you, maybe with fisticuffs. But the point is, of those two, either is better than nothing, and both of them are better than the vast majority of the competition out there. And there's 2 reasons, right? Well, actually, there's at least 3 reasons. One is, if you've got your passwords in a password manager, you're not writing them down, right? And when, you know, Chris's team are doing physical engagements, right, how often do you come across written down passwords?
Every time. You walk into an organisation and they're written everywhere. And every type of organisation, corporates, critical infrastructure, banks, everybody uses those Post-it notes for writing them down. We've all been guilty of it. But once you learn how to pick a good password and using a password manager, you don't have that problem anymore.
Yeah, so there's that. And then the other thing is that they don't store your... You know, people might go to the trouble of generating a password, which is number 2, right? Good password managers will generate passwords for you and generate good passwords, so you don't have to actually go to the mental effort of going, okay, now I should blah, 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 blah. No. And then the third thing is it stores the passwords encrypted, so unlike if, say, you're keeping them in a spreadsheet or anything else, if your computer is compromised, that doesn't mean that your passwords are then exposed.
So you reckon definitely go for a password manager?
Definitely.
Well, having been with these guys, I have never had one. I'm going to have one as of sometime on the weekend. Either of those two is good. Which one? One password?
Either
numeral
one password or LastPass. Keypass is another good one.
And so you just pay 10, 20 bucks, and then what, you can use it for everybody in your family. So you have one copy, they have another copy. You can just give it to them on a USB stick that doesn't burn their computer up. Yeah?
Yeah. Well, maybe don't get the USB stick off, Chris.
Yeah, okay, that'd be safe. So, but you can, if you've got one password manager, you can share it among your family.
Yeah, some of them are, you can use the thing for multiple installations. Just check the license when you get it. They're all reasonably priced anyway, you know,
right.
even for a dad with multiple daughters.
Right. How do you know then that if bad people have got your password, is that the only way? Have I been owned? Is that, what did you pronounce it again?
Poned.
Poned. So P is P and O at the same time. Oh God, that's so hard. Okay, now part of what you've got to do is reduce your profile. And I was trying to understand this from Suelette because she knows so much more about it than I did. And I said, what? Reduce your risk profile. And you gave me the example of the intelligence community. Can you just run that past everybody?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure which example we were exactly.
How they've got a need to know of information.
Oh, yeah. So in the intelligence world, you have compartmentalization. So even if people have very high security clearances, they might only have a small cluster of people who are able to know about a specific project or a specific activity that's going on. And in some ways, this is a good thing to practice in your everyday life if you want to protect your cyber privacy. So one way to do that is when you go to your local internet cafe to get, breakfast on a Saturday morning, don't enter in your Facebook details as your ID. Don't enter in your Gmail, details as your ID, because you don't necessarily want to link the fact that you're actually going to this place at a regular time on Saturday mornings and, link that with your Facebook account. You may want to keep those aspects of your life separate from each other.
So you try to reduce the profile as much as you can.
Yeah, you're trying to basically decide which bits of your life you want companies to know about, you want the rest of the world to know about, and that includes maybe changing some of the settings on your Facebook to decide, what bits of it you actually want to have public or not public.
Okay, now we'll throw to any questions at the audience. Anybody got a wavy hand for a question? We can throw an orange thing at you. Somebody want to throw the orange thing out? Here it comes.
First, and then if you can pass it back.
Yeah. Okay, lay it on us.
What are the panel's thoughts on the recent legislative push to force organisations to implement backdoors to circumvent encryption? And what do you think is the way forward to balance the combat against terrorism versus the privacy of private citizens?
Oh, a two-part question. Okay, so what was the first part again?
What are our thoughts on the legislation?
It sucks.
Push for legislation.
Oh, cough, cough.
So yeah, it's a really interesting quandary. I mean, to be honest, whilst the government would like to do this, and obviously Turnbull raised it at the G20, right? It's got no chance of ever working. Software companies aren't going to allow it. Can you imagine the Australian government trying to lobby Google to put a backdoor in to be able to get access, or trying to lobby WhatsApp? Just go. It's only 24 million people. Bugger it. We'll just leave it.
Although it might work with China, which has got 1 billion people.
Well, the thing is, the great thing about China is, for the majority of their citizens, they control the internet. So, they have more control to be able to put, and they just make things illegal and ban them from entering the country in the first place as best they can. So they have a better control. So I don't think it's got any chance of actually ever being successful. Of course, the government are going to ask for things like that. And when it comes to, should the government have better intel on terrorist activity if they're using these services? Yes, absolutely. But they're only going to catch the stupid ones. Because, some of the recent terrorist activity stuff, they were still using that old style of going into an online service, writing a draft email, and then not sending it. And
not sending it?
Not sending the draft email, and then their conspirator would log into the same account and read the draft email.
Right.
So they never actually transacted out of the platform.
And was that information available to anybody?
Yeah, so all the conspirators used one generic account, they logged into the account, and they would message each other through draft messages. This is a really common method these days online to be able to do stuff, but not actually send any traffic.
Wow. So on that terrorism thing, I think in America last year, The number of people killed by terrorists was of the order of half a dozen. The number of people killed by fellow Americans with guns was of the order of 25,000. In Australia, we've got 20 times more people killed by ladders than terrorists. Where are the ladder police? I've been hanging out for them for a long time.
So one thing that's really risky about the federal government's push for this legislation is that if you were to actually force these companies to in some way break the security of their products, the risk is not just that they can access that security hole that's been created to access messages and give it to the government on request. It's that the actual key to that door becomes available to other people as well. And as we've seen, for example, with WannaCry, that was based on a security flaw that the NSA had called Eternal Blue, and that was just going to be used by the NSA, right, for national security for purposes or whatever, and then it got out in the wild, and then all of a sudden you've seen WannaCry and ransomware spread everywhere. So the risk with these things is you could either have a really secure system where the mathematics are that nobody can break it, or you can have a system that has got backdoors or holes that are built into it, and then the risk is the bad guys can use those as easily as anybody else.
Okay, now, do you, Barry?
Just one last point. The important thing is that the same encryption that's protecting your private messaging is the encryption that's protecting your banking, right? You can't break private messaging and not break banking.
So therefore,
don't do it. But coming back to the threat model, I mean, as you said, right, more people killed by ladders. How many terrorist incidents have we had in Australia? And in how many, more importantly, in how many cases were the perpetrators not known in advance to law enforcement? More information is not the answer. I mean, fascists will always tell you they need more power, right? But no.
Can I just add one thing? If you guys are looking, while we're suggesting how you ramp up your cybersecurity, there is a little bit of a website we've got put up. It's called cybersecureyourself.net.
That's it up there?
Well, no, the EFF has got a set of tools as well that are really good, Electronic Frontier Foundation out of California. But for today, specifically for your dining pleasure, our fabulous Green Hat tech helpers have put cybersecureyourself.net together. So you can go and look at cybersecureyourself.net, and there's some specific advice about what we've been talking about today as well.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? One over here, orange microphone person.
Why do you think WannaCry included the kill switch in its code?
Can you explain what the kill switch was on WannaCry and what WannaCry was?
Yeah, and it was actually really interesting, right? Because the kill switch domain actually got registered by a guy who noticed there's a particular malware researcher who noticed very early on that this thing was looking up those domains and that they didn't exist. So he registered the domain, which actually activated a kill switch in the software. Now, the interesting thing about that was most times when malware is looking up domains, it's looking it up to get a next piece of malware, right? So what the good guys tend to do is block lookups that malware does. So on the one hand, you had this guy who went out and registered the domain and caused all the kill switches to activate and the stuff to essentially be benign. And then you had the good guys going, no, we must block these lookups, which meant that the kill switch didn't work, so the malware did do its business. Now, the thing about why do you think it was there, it looks like that was just the initial escape was more a test, right? And later versions actually, like 2.0, didn't have the kill switch domain.
Yep.
It always amazes me, right? Like, to your point, to be honest, you could come up with a conspiracy theorist kind of thing. It was a way for a government to stop it in case it went out of their target environment that they were after, such as we had with Stuxnet. But really, it's because the developer of it was crap. We're kind of lucky. A lot of these people who design these things don't really kind of think it's that cleverly. Like, I'm not sure if it was not the Pedier or the WannaCry, but there was a Postio email address that you had to email to get your token back to be able to decrypt your files after you paid your Bitcoin. The email provider, Postio, went, we don't really want to be part of that, so we'll just delete that account. So this ransomware was going around, and people were paying the bitcoins, getting their token, and sending it to the ransomware email address, only for it to bounce back and not have any way to ever get their files back. I think they made, what, in the end, like $40,000, the WannaCry people.
But what about the people whose software, whose data was then encrypted forever?
Gone.
But isn't there an
Backups.
argument? Yeah, sorry?
That's why we encourage backups.
Right.
Backups, 3 copies, 2 different medias, formats, 1 different location. 3, 2, 1.
So what's the backup rule? So 3
copies.
3 copies.
2 locations.
What on site and off site?
2 different media. Sorry, 2 different media.
2 different media. So what would they be, like hard drive and what else?
I'd say like put it on a flash storage, put it in a cloud provider, keep it at home.
But what if it's really big, like a couple of terabytes?
Unlimited data these days at Google for like, you know, $5 a month.
Okay.
They don't scan it either.
Yeah, if you're going to use the cloud, encrypt the data you put in the cloud.
Good point.
Well, the thing is that people think about the cloud as this big, sort of soft, fluffy, nebulous thing. But if on your smartphone, if you just wave your smartphone, if you want to watch a video for 1 hour on your smartphone, the amount of energy that it took on your smartphone is not much. But to get it to your smartphone for a 1 hour video is more electricity than it takes to run a refrigerator for a week. If you think of the cloud as this soft, fluffy thing, there are these huge buildings that cost $1 billion and they use 100 megawatts of power continuously all day. And if the cloud was a country, in terms of electricity consumption, it would be the 6th biggest country on Earth. And you do everything on the cloud and it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And in most cases it's fairly dirty in terms of how they get that energy and the cooling of it and so forth. So we need to get renewable on that as well.
Good point.
Another question from the audience here? Another one? No, yet one over here. So orange thing goes flying across. Here it comes.
Throw the cube.
Whee! Talk to the cube.
While you've been talking, I went and looked up, have I been pwned? And I'm on there. So what do you do?
Wow, so you've actually looked yourself up at that site.
Yeah,
and you put in, and you put your email address there.
And it went, you've been pwned 3 times. And I went, shit.
Oh, so it tells you how many times you've been pwned.
Yeah.
We can even say the word now, pwned.
Do you mind us?
Pwned.
Do you mind us asking which data breaches you were in?
Well, apparently I sign up for things and then never use them. So MySpace was there, and I didn't actually pay much attention because I wanted to listen to you guys again. But
okay.
Good choice. Good choice.
Yeah.
So
what were the other ones?
I can look at it. But
Yeah.
That's okay. So look, I think you know, good question, and don't be alarmed. Like, you know, stuff gets lost all the time. There's not a week that goes by in Australia that in the work that I do during my day job that we aren't aware of a significant data breach here in Australia affecting Australian citizens. It just never gets public. So, you know, some of the principles we've talked about is your defense layers. Have good passwords. Make them unique per site. Use 2-factor authentication. I think that's about it, really.
When you find out that you've been breached, right, or pwned,
Dropbox.
right?
Dropbox was there too.
Change those passwords
Yeah.
and change any other site where you used or reused those passwords. Right? It's not bad to find out you've been pwned because you were pwned the whole time. It's good to find out you've been pwned because now you can do something about it.
The other thing as well, it's good to know. I think at Have I Been Pwned, you can sign up so you can get future notifications, because when attackers do lose the data and the data gets published online, other attackers pick that data up and start using phishing emails for the service. So we're just good to be aware what's going on out there.
Yeah. Had you reused your email your password just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I'm one of those guilty people.
Like most people.
It's okay. You're at the confessional. It's okay.
Yeah, well, actually, I hope you don't mind me chucking another one in. I'm being really terribly spammed with that email address at the moment, and I don't know how to stop it. And I figure I just don't reply to any of the emails. I just keep deleting them.
Green Hat. Can Green Hat help with that?
Yes.
I figure this is a common problem.
Oh, look, wave your wiggly fingers and a Green Hat person will help you, and they'll be your best friend and help you out of this problem.
Yeah. So Colin behind you, if you go see him just after, he'll be more than happy to lend a hand to you.
Oh, wow, we've
Thank
actually
you.
fixed a problem, haven't we? Yeah. Now, Suelette, there's one thing that we should mention, the changing your Facebook settings.
Yeah,
Now, this
so
is a
one of the
really
things you
big
might
thing.
just think about is changing your Facebook settings. Now, Facebook makes that hard to do by changing how you change your Facebook settings about every 5 minutes. But there's a particular setting on there that's useful for privacy, particularly younger people here at Splendour. And that is you can go back to your previous posts, and if you've had it open to the public or to friends of friends, you might want to reset it just to friends. And a really good reason why is things you did when you were 18 at Splendour may not be things that you want photographic evidence of when you're 25 and applying for a job, or want a recommendation from a teacher, whatever it is. So we can give you some help if you stop by or just wave hands to one of the helpers or come by the Science Tent tomorrow at 12:30 on changing those settings. But that's a really good one to change. Now, if someone's already tagged you, you won't be able to remove that particular link, but at least it'll mean that when you apply for a job, and a lot of jobs now do ask for your social media accounts, you won't have that interesting trail of your splendid Splendour experience when you were younger.
Yeah. Oh, I've told all my kids to use as their birthday on their various social media either the first day of the year or the middle day, either the 1st of January or the 1st of June, so they can remember, and then the year that ends with a 0 closest to their real birthday, or with a 5. And then so that way they've got fake birthdays. My daughters have got they've got different names. They've chosen out of their large selection of names different names. But I really think that there are grounds that everybody should have training wheels on the internet until they're about 20-something. And so at the age of 20-something, suddenly everything you've done vanishes and then you pop out as an adult.
So one thing that is concerning is that Facebook is increasingly being used as an alternative almost to like your driver's license for ID. And that's what I was talking before about trying to compartmentalize a little bit about things in your life that might be private from things you may not want to expose more publicly or to different communities of people. So a lot of people I know have 2 Facebook accounts. They've got one that they'll show their bosses or their work, and they've got one where they detail what really happens in life.
Okay, any questions here from the audience? Another question from anybody? No. So what can people do then to reduce their footprint besides having a fake birthday?
You know,
That's pretty weak, isn't it?
I have a simpler rule around social media because, you know, you've got to sometimes convey these to people who don't really understand the internet. And it's a bit paranoid, but, you know, if you're a bit more of a security conscious person, my rule is don't put anything online that you're not prepared to print out and stick to the front of your fence outside the front of your house.
So that's reasonable. Yeah, so keep it quiet. Well, I've been worrying about journalism and how in the old days journalism and investigative reporting used to be funded by advertisements for cars and property, and now it's sort of funded by clickbait. And so I've been training up and mentoring a few journalist people and pointing out the advantage of having what they call the phones that you use once and throw away, and the burners.
Burner phones.
Yeah, tell me about burner phones. Is that real? Does that help at all?
Yeah, it's hard though, because obviously in Australia you've got to show or provide some sort of ID to actually get a phone, a SIM, to use in it, and that's not true in a lot of other countries, but it makes it much more difficult to get a SIM, and it's an offence to actually provide a false name and address for a SIM card in Australia.
Isn't it a legal offence?
Yeah, you're not allowed to do it. Well, not officially.
Ah.
Not that I would.
Okay, any last points you'd like to finish off as we come to the end, like enhancing technologies, Gmail, Yahoo accounts, don't use them to verify, we said that.
I think one thing that's really important to think about, for all of you to think about, is the need to be able to delete data about yourself. So one of the big problems we've got is this more and more data that we're giving to Google, giving to Facebook, giving to any number of organizations. Can we ever get it back, and can we delete it? And that's actually really difficult. It's probably, in my view, one of the most important privacy questions of the future is whether or not we will be able to ask organizations to delete data about us from the organizations. Doesn't seem to me that there's a lot of progress on that front. So the best thing is to not let the horse, out of the stable in the first instance. But maybe you guys have some ideas on the deletion.
Yeah, in Europe, I believe it's referred to as the right to be forgotten, and the idea is that if there's something that you don't want out there, that there's no, there's no public good argument for that information being out there, you should be able to have that information deleted. And that, to me, seems pretty reasonable. Where there's a compelling public good argument, like, for example, some of our politicians being able to say, oh, I never said that, we'll keep that information, thanks. But for something where, you've done something that, there's no danger to society at large by that being forgotten, you should have the right for it to be forgotten.
What about deleting... Sorry, go on, Chris?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's a great ideal, but we'll never get there. There are so many side markets, copying Facebook data that's made publicly available so they can retain a record of it. We keep an active archive of the internet on archive.org. It's gone. It's there. If it's there, it's done.
What about deleting data off your hard drive on your computer? Does that truly delete the data?
No. So
no. No. Hang on. So if I get the data and then delete it, it's not deleted, right?
No.
Why not?
Yeah.
What went wrong? I thought delete meant delete.
Unfortunately not, and it's a real problem, especially our disposable society. We throw devices away. Organisations, have been caught out by taking printers and disposing of them, and the hard disks on those printers store copies of the files or the scans or whatever's been going through them. So when you delete something, you really the operating system just marks that file as actually not being able to be written over. But there is obviously very, simply available software for you to go and recover your files or somebody else's files on these.
So, in other words, normal deleting is like you've got a book and the book has got a table of contents, and all you do is you rip out the table of contents, but the data is still there if you want to go looking for it slowly and painfully.
Correct, and there are tools to rebuild that table of contents. But good news, in modern operating systems, there is the option to securely delete something, and that is when it writes over where that file was several times to make sure that there is no recovery mechanism.
What does that exist on mobile phones? Because I've passed on a few phones, and I've done the thing where it says, do you want to wipe this and restore it to factory settings? Does that truly wipe everything, or does it just make it available for rewriting over later?
It depends on the phone. And,
Apples?
Recent Apples, yes. Older Apples, no.
Okay. Right, any last questions before we go? No? So your next events are, what have I got here? The second panel on election hacking today. What time is that?
2:30, I think.
So election hacking is where...
So I'll be on the panel this afternoon on election hacking. And Marcy, who's down here, has come all the way from Grand Rapids, Michigan for it. We'll be talking about hacking elections, and Anthony Green from the ABC will be on that, and Dr. Vanessa Teague. So that'll be about a little bit exploring about the idea of nations hacking each other election system, how secure are election systems, and how does our current electoral system work in terms of whether it's going to be voting on iPhone in the future or continued paper ballots.
And then you've got a gig at 12:30 in the science tent.
Tomorrow, 12:30 in the science tent. All our helpers will be there. You can come in. It's really small and intimate, just next door. We'll all be there, and we're happy to lend a hand with whatever security questions you got to just boost your cybersecurity a little bit on your phones or tablets.
And what's that site where you go to find out if you've been pawned? Have I been pawned?
Have I been pwned?
Pwned. P-W-N-E-D, right. With a space between have and I and been.
Yeah.
Okay,
have
right.
I been pwned? And also cybersecureyourself.net.
Okay, so can you give a big hand to Dr. Suelette Dreyfus? Yep, thank you. And Chris Gatford and Barry Anderson. And we've already had one person benefit already. So ask the Green Hat people if you don't know how to use all those crazy settings. Thank you very much.